Welcome to the Jack Westin MCAT Podcast with your hosts, Michael Maleka
and Molly Kilty. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of our Jack Westin MCAT Podcast with your hosts, Mike and Molly. This is going to be an unexpected and fun episode. For context, Mike and I were talking about Exam 6 last episode, and we actually both sat down and took AAMC Exam 6, and we wanted to share our thoughts and feelings with you guys, especially given that put together we have like almost 10 years of MCAT teaching experience. But we ultimately kind of started talking about how important it is to review what you've done on your exam in order to figure out trends and ultimately try and figure out like how are you going to take action on these things. And it's so critical that we want to talk about that first. Also, just as a little nugget of excitement and some foreshadowing for our next episode, where we will officially talk about Exam 6. We are both very data-driven people.
Huge.
And one of the things that we hear all the time, especially recently, is psych-soc is changing. It's becoming more like cars, or we see more low yield content than we ever have on these full lengths, or on our real exams. And we put our heads together and we're like, okay, these are our thoughts. We want to have some data to back it up. We are crunching some numbers, and we've got some fun information that we're going to share in our next episode. So get excited for it. This is going to be a fun one.
Yeah. And so next episode is when we're going to really break down AAMC exams. I remember taking it and I had all these expectations, right? Because I'd heard all these things from students like, oh, the exam nowadays is so different. Again, we're a little bit, I don't know what I want to say dated. Like we took this exam quite a while ago. Of course, we've been teaching for the longest time. And I was expecting this exam to be so different based on what students are saying, right? They're like, it's so different. And we've got some maybe fun and surprising things to say about kind of now the most recent exam. So stick around for next episode. But this episode, like Molly was saying, we are going to be really diving into how to learn and how to grow from your exams, right? Because again, we took this exam and we were thinking like, if we were students after taking this exam, what am I supposed to do after the exam? Like when we were in this position, when we were taking practice exams, how did we actually use exams, right? Because there's this common idea that most students have, right? That exams are like a report card, right? It's like just a scoreboard, like where do I stand right now? But high scorers, top scorers like Molly and myself, we don't see it that way. Exams are not a report card. They're a roadmap. They're to give you direction on where to go next. So we're going to be talking about the mindset required, and the steps that you can use in order to take your exams, learn from your exams, and make a plan for next time so you can continue to improve. So I'm really excited for today, and equally, if not more excited, for next week when we actually dive into Exam 6.
Yes. You know what? I feel like next week is going to be really, really fun, but this one I think is even more actionable.
True.
Because so many students take full lengths and they're like, okay, shucks, I got a 494 or I got a 501 or I got a 520, who knows? And it's like, okay, great. Now I'm done. Next full length. And it's like, please no, right? One of the things that we've talked about, and I know that we've had episodes that we've talked about, the exact procedure of how to review a full length, and you can go dredge back into our history from months ago if you want the exact procedure. But really, I think there are some major misconceptions about what needs to be done when we're done with the full length. And too many of us are like, okay, especially if you see it as a report card. Okay, I got my grade. Maybe I was happy with it. Maybe I wasn't. Let's see if it's better now, right? Let's just imagine that essentially the process of taking a full length was the valuable part. And I'm here to tell you, right? We'll call this misconception number one. It's not like that. It's not like that. The actual event of sitting down and taking a 7.5-hour exam, roughly, it's useful.
True.
You're gaining procedural memory in just being able to sit for that long. You kind of are intuitively building the understanding of like the flow of the test, the experience of test taking. It's important for endurance, for time management skills. and it's giving you a constant evaluation of how much you know. However, you are not going to learn much from actually sitting and just testing. Okay. And it's the same with your practice questions. If you want to actually get better and improve, you have to review it, and not just review it and say, okay, I'm bad at this stuff. Now what? You have to take action on it. If anyone here listening is like, Molly, Mike, I've been stuck at X score for X amount of months or weeks, and I don't know if I'll ever get better. The very first question that I would ask you is, how are you reviewing? Because that is
Sure.
the thing that holds so many of us back. Either we're not reviewing at all, we're not reviewing, you know, enough, or some of us listening might be like, I spend days reviewing.
Hmm.
And the problem isn't that you're not trying, it's that you're not doing it efficiently or not doing it effectively. So this, I think, really could not be any more relevant to this area or this time in the testing cycle. A lot of us are preparing for January, February exams, and I don't think it could be any more impactful um, in terms of like content coverage today, because this is so, so important.
So critical, right? And I remember myself, and I get these questions all the time. It's like, what's the most important part? Like, oh, should I do more practice? Should I do more exams? Like, how do I do more? The most important part is not doing the exams. The most important part is what you learn from the exams. If you do not actually extract the value from the exams, right? This is kind of an extreme statement I kind of say to really kind of get some shocked eyes, but every passage you don't thoroughly review is a waste of time. It's
Yeah.
truly, if you don't actually review your passages, whether this in the sciences or especially in cars, you just do
Yeah.
it and then just move on to the next thing, you do not actually get the value if you don't review it. But how we review is also critical because there's, again, a lot of misconceptions, like Molly was saying before, about how to review, the value of the review, where is it? And another misconception that we see all the time is when we review, we just look at our questions and think, oh, I just need more content. Right? It's just a content issue. Oh, I need more content. Oh, this is a content exam, right? Oh, if only I'd known that small piece of information, right? And
Yeah.
I can tell you with absolute certainty, this is not a content exam. Right? Again, and again, we just took this exam. We just took this exam. I took it this last weekend, right? And this idea is that it's all a bunch of like, oh, low yield content. I just need to pick all the details. But the thing is, this is not a content exam because you are not expected to know all these little details in the passage, right? They're going to be throwing so much new information at you in these passages. And a lot of students think, oh, I was supposed to know all of that. I was supposed to have previously seen that so I could like answer these questions. But I can tell you, when I was taking this, I didn't know half of it. I had never seen half the things in these passages. And again, between Molly and I, we've been doing this for 10 years. So if we haven't seen it, that probably means you were not meant to know it. So that means if it's not a content issue, what is it then? Right? That's the question. But the first misconception that we have is it's content when it usually isn't. Again, I want to make a preface here. Sometimes, if you haven't done any content review and this is like
Yeah.
your very first exam, there is probably some content issues. Like if you haven't done anything, like so this is your very first, just your diagnostic, sure, there will be things that, okay, you will have some content gaps here, absolutely. But if you're into your studying, you've done your basic review, you've done a few exams, and you still think it's content, usually it's not. And that's actually what's inhibiting our growth because we haven't actually identified what the real issue is.
Yeah. And when you were talking about, a huge percentage of these passages have so much new information, this is exactly why I love cars.
Hmm.
Because cars, you go into it knowing that there's no content. Okay. Everything that you read is expected to be new. And your job in cars is just to recognize what is being said, be a sponge for the author's ideas, and answer as them in the questions. In science, of course, you have content that you're expected to know, right? You have foundational concepts and topics that you're expected to understand, at least at a basic level, right? In order to answer the questions correctly. However, I think cars and science are more similar than most people give them credit for because exactly like you're saying, there's not an expectation that you know every term and, molecule and pathway that's in a passage in science. That's not an expectation that we'll ever have for you. This is all new rather than just being a sponge for the author's opinion like you are in cars. Here, you are thinking about how these things fit into the context that you have built in your content learning, but ultimately, a huge chunk of it is going to be new. And you need to be ready to unpack new information and deal with the discomfort of, I didn't memorize this. I didn't study this. If you were to go in and try and memorize all the things that are in a passage or that ultimately get asked about in the questions, because of course, if they tell you details in the passage, they have permission to ask you about them. When we go through that and we try and memorize and learn all of this new material from passages and questions, that's a huge waste of time because they're not expecting that you know that. They don't want you to try and learn it. They want you to learn why they asked that question. They want you to realize where the clue was that they could have asked that question and the clue of how to find the answer. Again, this really is a critical thinking test. We see it the most in critical analysis and reasoning skills or CARs, but even sciences. When we default to, I missed this question because I didn't know the material, we do ourselves a huge disservice. And we ultimately are going to get stuck in terms of our score because we're not giving ourselves a chance to employ strategy when we assume it's content. And
Yeah.
that strategy need is so, so critical and so overlooked. I always tell students default to the passage, not
Mm.
just like if the passage information contradicts what you know about your content, then passage should win. Every time you read a question, before you think about anything else, what does this remind me of from the passage? Do they have keywords that link me to the signaling cascade presented or the methods paragraph? Are they asking me about a figure or something that I know is in the figure? Find the clue from the passage first and then use your content to unpack it. Don't see a question and automatically assume this is supposed to be with my content. I don't know what this thing does, this unknown molecule, but let me just do my best. They might have defined it for you in the passage. Go look. Default to the passage, and you're going to save yourself a lot of grief and ultimately help that review process and that improvement process pretty steadily.
Pretty absolutely. And I think there's also an important thing like that you're kind of mentioning where, yes, always default for the passage, but in order to default to the passage, you have to have read the passage first. Guys,
Yes.
when you are doing your science passages
Mm.
and then you're reviewing them after, make sure do not skip to the questions first. This is a common thing we see. It's like, oh, what if I don't need the passage? Well, you don't know if you need it or not need it for a question because you don't even know what's there. So and this is kind of relates back to our science passage reading strategy, which we've gone through in a previous episode. Maybe we'll do a review episodes on it later on. I think that might be cool. Where when we're tackling passages, in order to actually give ourselves the best opportunity to succeed, actually read the passage first before going to the questions because in the review, ask yourself, right, did I follow a strategy? If I had followed that strategy, would I have been able to get this question right? Even if it's not, even if I think it's content, could I have still gotten it right? And so, kind of to piggyback off what I was saying, in order to do that, you have to read the passages. So please read the passages first. That is really, really important. Another misconception I see a lot of the times in review, right? Because again, I speak with students a lot. I've got like a few tutoring students now, and we're like in exams, we're doing exams now. And a student mentioned this the other day, and they were like, "Yeah, a lot of my review is I look at the solution and I see it, and I'm like, okay, I get it, and I move on." And I'm like, wait a minute, slow down." Right? A misconception is that, oh, if I read the explanation and it makes sense, I'm good and I move on. Absolutely not, right? Absolutely not. Just reading the explanation and just talking, oh, that made sense, is review is not true. Reason being, it didn't require you to actually critically think, right? You did not get to that solution, right? And so, of course, when you see it, you're like, oh, obviously, duh. All right, that makes sense. But did you actually consider how next time are you going to get to that conclusion? What are the steps in order to get to that point? Because a lot of people don't do that. They have hindsight bias. They're like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Then we'll get it next time. But because they don't make a plan, they don't actually change their trajectory on how they're going to get there. We just end up making the same mistakes over and over again. Just reading the solution, oh, I get it, but then making the same mistakes. And so do not just say, oh, I read the explanation and it made sense. That's my review. That will not actually lead to growth. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. When you check the solution directly after completing the question, and like you said, you just say, yep, that makes sense, you lose out on all the learning, right? So often in courses and in tutoring sessions, we hear students say, well, it makes sense when you walk me through it, but when I do this on my own, it doesn't make sense. And it's because y- it's not a good thing to just have the knowledge handed to you.
Mm.
right? It's a good thing if you've tried and you're still struggling, but it shouldn't be your first instinct is this doesn't make sense. Someone should explain. It's like, no, no, you have to try. Sometimes the struggling to understand is what primes us to actually remember when it does click. And sometimes if you don't have to struggle for it, your brain, this information wasn't really that critical. Like you just feel, oh, okay, that makes sense. Toss it out of your brain, right? In one ear, out the other. It's like because you didn't have to work for it, your brain it's not that important, right? And you're not probably going to remember and you're not going to be able to take action on it in the future. So trying to figure out what was my thinking? How was I thinking about this when pressure was high? I was stressed. I was running out of time. How was I thinking in that moment? And reflecting on that and say, okay, well, I might have been scared. I was feeling this, I was feeling that. That led me to ignore certain elements in this passage that would have been helpful for me. How can I make sure I don't do that again in the future? A solution's not going to be able to tell you that. Solution's not going to be, hey, Molly, when you saw this question, you were still scared of the last question and you used the answer to that last question to answer this one. That's your problem. You got to treat each question like an individual activity. Don't take the fear of the last one into the next one. A solution's never going to say that.
Right.
That's something that you have to figure out. Those are the strategies that we're talking about.
Mhm.
So fighting for it takes time, it takes brain power. And for those two reasons, most people are like, nah, I'll read
Ah,
the
I don't want to do
solution.
that.
I'll watch one of our video solutions that we have for our dailies or for AAMC material. That's all.
Mm.
Like, you can do that. And those are there. We make them to help you when you don't understand, but ultimately, we don't make those to steal your opportunity to learn, right? It's
Right.
to supplement your opportunity to learn. It's almost I like to think of it as a phone a friend on like a game show. It's like
Mhm.
you try it yourself, but you shouldn't have unlimited phone a friends, or else really your friend is the one that's on the
That's
game
doing
show.
it. Yeah.
Right? Like they should win the $1 million or
Mhm. Mhm.
whatever.
Right. And we've already taken our exams. We've already moved on, right? It's now your turn. Anyone listening. So again, yeah, there are those videos are just tools when we offer those solutions, but tools can be used correctly, but they can also be used incorrectly as well.
Yeah.
And again, I think you and I both really relate to this in our own journeys, right? Our favorite topics to teach are the ones that we struggled with the most. Because we struggled with it, that means we learned it, and now when we teach it, not only can we teach it better, because again, we struggle with ourselves, so we know what the pitfalls are, but we just know it better. Like I feel like I know the things I struggled with when I was studying with the MCAT, I know better now because I had to struggle with it. Whereas the stuff that was like kind of like, oh, I didn't really have to focus on it too much, I don't know them nearly as well now than
Yeah.
the stuff I struggle with. So the struggle is important. Don't rob yourself of that by just looking at the solution and then moving on. Right. And there is one more misconception that, both of you and I see all the time, Molly. It's when we do an exam. Again, I think this is, to be honest, more common when you take earlier exams rather than later exams. But maybe you're taking your first few exams and you're seeing a lot of errors, possibly. You're seeing a lot of different areas of growth. You're like, oh my goodness, my passage strategy is off here, my content's off here, my X is here, my data interpretation, oh, my timing, right? And we feel like, oh, I have to fix all of these all at once, right? Oh, I have to do all of this all at once. Oh, I have all these different content areas I need to do it all at once, right? A misconception that you have to fix everything you missed from your exam, and that is not true, right? The goal of the exam is to give a roadmap to what's next. I want you to reflect on everything, every growth opportunity, but you have to be selective and you have to be targeted on what is going to be give me the most bang for my buck in terms of how should I improve, right? Sure, there may be a bunch of content areas that maybe you struggled with that you need to review. If it's like amino acids versus psych disorders, right? You have to prioritize. Oh, going ham on those amino acids is going to give you way more dividends than focusing on psych disorders because that is a targeted area to improve. And then the next time around when you take an exam, maybe you're not good on psych disorders yet, and that's okay, but at least you improved your amino acids, right? Take these steps, small steps, but actionable ones. Right? Because I feel like we get like resource, like cognitive overload when we have like all this information and we're like, oh my goodness, I have so much to fix. Get targeted, make a plan. Like I struggle with all these things. Maybe I'm going to work on this content area and my passage reading strategy, and that's it. And that's okay. Where the next time you take a full length, you've improved on those things and you're not making those same mistakes. That's a win. Maybe your score hasn't moved. That's okay, right? you've improved on those specific things, and you are taking steps to improve, even if it hasn't shown just yet in your actual exam score. Mhm.
Yeah. Students tend to respond to a lower score in one of two ways.
Mhm.
And it's funny, we were talking about signal detection theory, right? If you hear, if you're trying to decide if, let's say, you heard a beep, you're in one of those, childhood hearing test little
Mhm.
trailers, right? They're playing the sounds. You press a button if you heard it. When you aren't sure, right? Or if you're in a period of uncertainty, some people push forward. I heard the beep. Some people say, no, I didn't hear it. I'm not going to press the button. And I think it's very parallel to how we respond to a lower score. If we get a lower score and we're unsure of what to do next, oftentimes students fall into one of two camps and they're either, I want to test again. I don't want to review that. I don't want to look at it. I'm just going to take another test because the next one will be better. Push forward, keep going. And then there's another camp of students that are like, I cannot take another test until I have fixed everything.
Mm.
I can't move forward until I have covered every single gap that I saw in that test. And ultimately, both of those paths can be problematic. Okay. You're not expected to be perfect. I always tell my students, again, when we took our MCATs, we both obviously did very well. I don't know about you though, Mike. I was not a walking encyclopedia of all things MCAT when I took my test, right? Like I didn't know everything. I wasn't this absolute genius born with all of this
That
information in
she
my
is
head
now.
at all. I don't know about that either, right? We all have things that we want to work on, but like you said, it's not, I need to fix everything before I can move forward. It's prioritizing. What is the thing that is holding me back the most right now? That becomes priority number one. Okay, take care of that, get some more practice, see how you're doing. Once you're done with that practice, you essentially have a new priority one, right? You do another little diagnostic, you get another practice test in, or you do another practice set. Okay, now what is my first priority? Hopefully, I've taken care of whatever my priority was last week or yesterday, but now what? And maybe it was amino acids yesterday, maybe now it's fluids, right? But you get a new first priority and you chip away. One of the things that we talk about a lot in our course design, when we're designing the curriculum for our courses, is what we call a spiraling curriculum. You cover something, and then a few days go by, and guess what? Here it comes again.
Mhm.
And you let a couple days go by, and here it comes again. You see things again and again and again. And hopefully it all clicks the first time. But if it doesn't perfectly click the first time, it's going to click the next time that it comes up, right? And if it doesn't perfectly click that time, it'll come up again and it'll click then, right? It helps with retention, but also recognize that you learn in layers. And in a context like the MCAT, where there are, huge entire year-long courses that are on this exam tested all at the same time, learning in layers becomes even more important.
Yeah, and I think having that mindset when like making that progress makes it so much more manageable. Because you and I both like talk to students, especially in our office hours or in our free trial sessions, which I recommend everyone to join. Right, a lot of students come to say like, I feel really overwhelmed by all the things I want to improve on. Where bring it down, focus in, take these steps, and make it more manageable. And that's how we actually lead to improvements instead of kind of getting that overload all at once.
Mhm.
And I think that kind of brings us to kind of the point of like on that identifying what to improve on identifying those areas to improve, we can talk about like what are the errors that we see? What are the errors that we might make on an exam? And this is kind of like a generalization. This isn't like the only way that we can kind of classify the different errors that we make on an exam, but there's kind of four like buckets that we say that an error can fall into. And the first one is a real one. I don't want to kind of lessen that it is real, but it's one we have to be very careful with, right? So the first reason you might struggle, the first struggle area might be maybe it truly is a content error, right? But this is one I want to preface carefully, right? Because sometimes, like we said this before. I think Molly, you mentioned this once, and I actually absolutely loved it, where you mentioned that content is necessary, but it is not sufficient, right? I love that quote. You said it once, and I was like, it's always stuck. And this is a very true thing where when we're identifying our errors, when we're looking and reviewing, okay, what are the areas that I struggle with and need to improve in? There are sometimes where, yes, it was a content error. Of course, we don't want to generalize. We always want to ask, was there still a way for me to get this question right without knowing this piece of content? But if it truly was impossible, like for example, if you don't know your amino acids and you see an amino acid question, you're not likely not going to get it correct. Know your amino acid. That like it's that sort of deal where if it was like no other way without knowing that content, okay, you can say it's a content issue, right? Because again, it is necessary. Right, so that's the first bucket of why you could get a question right. But again, like on the some and when it comes to how we can fix that, there's kind of a few different ways to look at a content error. Like, is this a content error? Because I've just never seen this content. Those kinds of errors, I'm okay with. Right, when I'm reviewing an exam, like if I am like mid in my content phase, and I'm a big on like taking exams before you're done content, right? Because again, this is not a content exam. You want to get familiar with this exam. If you are studying, light and optics in 2 weeks, and you get a light and optics question wrong now, it's obviously a content error. I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'm not going to stress about it. I'm not going to be like, oh my goodness, this is the end of the world. I'm like, I haven't learned it yet. I can take a look, maybe familiarize myself with how they ask the questions so that when I learn it, I'll be like, oh, that's what they've been getting at this whole time. Actually remember this so specifically when I was taking my exam because I was doing exams within my content. I remember there was a psych social concept about like ocean, about like the universal traits. That was later on in my studying. I kept on seeing questions about that, and I'm like, when I learn this, I'm gonna be so good at this, at these types of questions. And then I did, and I was like, oh, that's what they mean. So if it's a content area, like, oh, it's a content gap, don't feel like you have to completely learn that content area right there and then. Except, oh, if I haven't actually seen that content, that's okay. But then on the other hand, if this is a content area that you have seen, like maybe you studied enzymes last week, but you're still getting enzyme questions wrong because you completely forgot what a non-competitive inhibitor is to an enzyme, right? This is one where our review we have to be more intentional with. Maybe we have to start implementing like more intentional review, like Anki, for example, where we have to maybe make sure that we have our separate terms kind of memorized. Maybe we didn't understand the content. Maybe our problem is we've memorized too much and we don't actually know how to apply the information, right? There has to be a little bit more of a deep dive on content that you actually have learned before. But I kind of want to stress because I see it way too often where students haven't learned a content area and they're like, oh my goodness, I need to spend so much time on this. No, that's okay. It's in your plan. You'll do it later. But on the content that you have covered before, that's when we want to take a little bit of a closer view. Mhm.
And also to add, make sure you're thinking of how big is my content concern, especially
Mhm.
with stuff you've covered in the past. Like if you, let's say, struggle with an electrochemistry question. Okay. Let's say you're already pretty comfortable with what a galvanic voltaic cell is versus what an electrolytic cell is. Okay. You understand red cat and ox. You understand Leo goes Gur. Like you understand the basics of what's going on, but you don't understand why one electrode is positive versus the other is negative for galvanic voltaic or electrolytic. Okay. I want you to, when you decide, okay, let's say I missed a question. It was very straightforward, very content heavy, and it was asking which is positive in an electrolytic cell, cathode, anode, whatever. Okay. In that situation, you missed it, and you missed it for a content reason, but you need to ask how big was that content gap? In that situation, if I'm already actually really comfortable with redox, if I'm comfortable with the types of electrochemical cells, if I understand the basics, but I'm just struggling with why something is positive or negative. You can tell if you're watching the videos, I'm using air quotes. Positive and negative are not charges.
Mhm.
It's very common misconception. It's actually a very, very narrow, very specific content concern that actually can be solved with the 5 minute YouTube video. Like, please don't feel like, oh, I missed a question in electrochemistry. That means I need to start from scratch and
Oh,
relearn
mm.
everything that I've ever looked at or seen about electrochemistry. No, you want to be as specific as you can, especially with topics that you've studied. Okay, I'm missing questions in electrochemistry, but why? What topics within that? If I feel comfortable in some of it, what am I not comfortable with? And
Mm.
can I spot treat that content? Because too often we have students that are like, oh, I'll just log on to the JW website and watch the full lecture on it. It's like, That's awesome if you struggle with that topic, because we'll go start to finish, we'll make sure you know everything. But if you just have one teeny little thing, or you just need to review something because it's been a while since you've seen it, you don't have to dive in head first and look at literally every content or topic underneath that umbrella category of something like electrochemistry. So keep in mind the depth to which that
Depth.
content gap is presenting itself to, especially for things that you haven't studied,
Mhm.
or things that you have studied, excuse
Right,
me.
right. Yeah,
Um,
I actually love that point on the specificity. There's this quote in my mind when you said the word specific, is that fear goes away in the specific, right? A lot of content
mm,
areas we are scared
love
of
that.
because we're like, oh my goodness, it's so big. Whenever I see an electrochem question, I know in the past I've always gotten it wrong, so I'm now afraid of this electrochem question. But if you actually start getting specific, like, okay, what didn't you understand? What didn't you understand? You actually start asking yourself a question like, oh, wait a minute. No, I get all the other stuff. Oh, it's actually this specific thing. So if I just learn that thing, this whole area isn't so scary anymore. And so I always ask this question when a student's like, oh, I struggle with all of acids and bases. It's like, I'm sure there's many areas that you do understand. Let's get a little bit more specific. What about acids and bases do you understand? Is it the different definitions? Is it on protons versus electrons? The different where are we? Then we can actually start growing. We don't have to be scared of it anymore. So I love that you're like, we got to narrow in and be specific because that's when those fears kind of go away because we're like, oh, it's actually not as bad as I thought it would be.
Yeah. That was exactly my experience with physics and chem.
Hmm.
I've brought this up multiple times. Sitting down to study for my test, I took my full length. I didn't do so hot on those. I actually, I did better than I thought I would.
Hmm.
Before I officially took a test, I thought that I would need to spend at least half of my study time before my actual test date on OChem and physics. I thought I would get like 10% accuracy because I didn't have as much experience with those from my undergrad. I didn't really cover those in as much depth. I didn't have quite as great of teachers as I did for the other subjects. Um, but when I took my full length, I was kind of surprised. I mean, it wasn't that those were actually my best subjects, but they really didn't lag behind my others. I was like, oh, okay. Like I'm scared of those, but actually, really, I need to review fluids and optics. And like those are my big things. Like energy, I didn't really realize, but like I'm pretty good at forces and energy. Like I'm actually surprisingly good at sound too. Like those things that I kind of lumped into just like physics that were scary. I'm like, actually, a lot of those things I'm doing okay. And it's really just these specific topics that I need to review. And then I could take action on that. And then I got better.
Amazing.
It's magical how it works when you do get more specific. So I love that quote. I'm glad that you brought that up. Now, I think when we talk about content, students are comfortable. We don't always respond the way that we should in terms of how in depth we jump in and how scary it could be. But I think most of us are pretty used to like, okay, I didn't learn that or I didn't know that, so I need to learn it. I think what gets more difficult is when it's actually a strategic issue. How
Mm.
do we improve if I always misread the question? How do I improve if I can't find the passage clue? How do I improve if I can't unpack a research figure? These are all strategic things, right? And there are strategies that you can learn. We've got a bunch in our courses. We even talk about some in our textbooks, things like that. There are strategies that you can learn, but ultimately, knowing a strategy, like doesn't do anything for you. Like just knowing like, oh, taught, title, axes, units, trends, having that in your head does nothing for you. Not that that's not an amazing strategy. It's amazing, but you have to know how to use it. So especially for these strategy questions, if you just hop right to the answers or to the solutions, you're never going to get better because ultimately it requires a lot of thinking and processing in order to understand how strategy can be used there. So ultimately it's recognizing trends in your strategic performance and then it's seeking out similar questions and making sure that you don't just default to the video solution or the written solution. You have to jump through the hoops, do those mental gymnastics at least to a point where you no longer can figure it out. And then you use your phone a friend. Okay. For this, especially, you have to get the practice on your own and you have to give yourself the freedom and the grace to actually learn from it. There's really no other way that you can improve in strategy except practice and review, practice and review. Right. Again, phone a friend, call us up or watch our
We'll help
videos.
out. We'll help you
Yes.
out.
But so many students are like, I didn't understand, so I immediately watched the video. I'm like,
Mm,
I'm
no.
glad you find it useful. We make those so students can use them, but it shouldn't be an automatic reflex. Just watch the video and then you don't have to review. There's no substitute
Right.
really for strategic issues.
A word that was in my mind when you were mentioning that is intention. You have to be
Ah,
I knew it had to come up once. Is the intention behind it, right? I think this second bucket about like strategy issues, like, oh, when I misread the question or I missed something in the passage, a lot of the times I feel like students make like there's like kind of these two kind of answers when it's actually a strategy issue, but they kind of misdefine it. They're like, oh, I misread the question. It was a silly mistake. Oopsie. I forgot the not. I forgot the accept. Right? Oh, silly mistake. Oops. Um,
stop,
oh,
stop, 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 stop. Silly mistake makes my head want to blow up.
like or they're like, oh, I need to read more carefully. I just need to read more carefully. Right?
That's better, but still not
It's
actionable.
better. But the problem is it's not actionable exactly, right? A lot of times we misinterpret strategy issues as silly mistakes or lack of care or carefree, right? Where these are actually strategy issues. It's shocking how many people, and maybe if you're a regular listener to this podcast, you know better, right? Strategy is a huge part of this exam, but many people kind of don't recognize how important a really kind of reliable strategy is. Right. I mean, I do a lot of trial sessions for tutoring where if you want to try out tutoring, you can talk to an advisor to see if tutoring is right for you. And one of my first questions I usually ask is, do you have a passage reading strategy or a answer question answering strategy? And overwhelmingly, I would venture a guess like 90% of people say no. That's shocking to me as somebody who relies on strategy as like that's like my backbone whenever I go through cars, when I go through the sciences, that's priority number one then. Because so many, especially really bright students, are missing points because they're not reading questions properly, because they're not knowing what to take away from a passage, and those things are fixed through a really intentional strategy, but they a lot of times attribute those things to other things, and then they continue struggling with it. So if you're listening and you're like, "Oh, I make silly mistakes all the time," or I always misread the question, "Oh, I always miss all the clues from the passage," again, it's not like an issue with you or your reading ability. It's probably because we need to work on our strategy. And so having that intentional strategy and practicing it, Molly, you put it wonderfully where it's not just about knowing it. Maybe you're in our self-study bundle, you've watched us explain the strategy to you. You're like, oh, that makes sense. But if you don't actually do it on your own, you will not get used to it. You will not improve, and you won't do it when you practice exams. A lot of times we're like, oh, I'm going to practice my strategy. But as soon as the stress or the pressure of practice exams comes, everything goes away, right? We have to practice under time conditions. We have to do it consistently so that there is no other option. This is the only thing that we do when we tackle a passage.
That was exactly what I was going to say. You took the
Mhm.
words right out of my mouth.
Mhm.
When we talk about silly mistakes, one of the most common things is, oh, I was just tired. Like I was just tired. I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't reading right. I didn't understand the question because I was tired. And people use that as kind of a scapegoat of like, I would get that right if I wasn't tired. And I'm sure, for a great percentage of questions, that might be true. However, you're going to be tired and you're going to be stressed when you take this test. So that, I was tired, it's not enough. It's not enough to be like, oh, okay, then you're fine. Don't worry about it. Because the thing is, and most people don't plan ahead for this, when you take a full length, you feel tired, you feel exhausted, you feel stressed. But imagine now, this is not just a practice test, this is your real test. You are in an unfamiliar environment. You've got to do this weird check-in. You lock away your phone. You've got, some couple snacks in the locker, but you're wondering, do I have enough food? Do I have enough caffeine? Do I have this? Do I have that? Not to scare anybody, but if you only ever practice when you feel mentally sharp, you just woke up, you feel great, you feel, you've stretched, you feel good, you're not going to perform the same in your practice as on your test because you are failing to account for the variables that influence full length scores that are not just your knowledge or your strategy, right? There are a lot of other factors, including timing, including things like stress and, endurance concerns and just fatigue, which is why you have to practice in similar conditions to what you'll be tested in. So if you find yourself often saying, well, I would get it right, but I was just tired. Practice more when you're tired. And it gets to a point where, especially if you've got, let's say, endurance concerns, I just get tired. Um, your way forward is you got to do more practice in a row back to back. Like you just have to build that endurance, have longer study periods. You have to adapt and adjust your ability to focus for that long Put your phone away. Make sure you eliminate all distractions, right? Start to account for these variables that will influence your performance on test day. And if you're someone who feels overwhelmed more so by stress than by fatigue, you need timed practice. You need to be doing time practice. And if you're already at a point where you're able to finish a test on time, but the stress is there, then you need to be putting yourself in as crazy as it is, in stressful situations so that you could build coping strategies. Okay, because one of the things that we're going to talk about is if once you've figured out, okay, this is my problem, this is what I'm struggling with, the question then becomes, how do I cope with this and how do I move forward? Okay, content we've talked about, it makes sense, right? You got to learn it, be as specific as you can so you don't overdo it or, it doesn't hold you back. When it comes to strategy, it's practice and it's review. If it's timing and endurance, you know what you got to do. But again, how do we cope? Let's say we're struggling with time. What do we do? Do we just keep kicking the can down the road, skim the last passage? Can we adjust in the moment of, okay, I'm running about 5 minutes behind. That's at least a couple questions. If I figure that out halfway through the test, the next time I see a question that completely overwhelms me and just makes me question my existence, flag, guess, move on. I just made a minute back. Okay. Right. I was 5 minutes behind, but now I'm getting closer to being able to finish the test on time. You can implement strategies for yourself that help you cope with the things that create that situation that causes the silly mistakes, right? That's how you eliminate a silly mistake.
True.
You got to fix it, diagnose, treat, use a coping strategy.
True. I also know, and this is something I always like when I hear students like, oh, I struggle with timing. Like my timing is like my enemy. Like I always struggle with timing. I used to ask you, oh, when you're reading or you're in your section, are you trying to do it on time? And they're like, yes. And this is something that I feel very strongly about. I remember I mentioned it once before, or a few episodes ago, and it's the idea of from a book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Big fan for anybody out there. Highly recommend. It's the more that you focus on something, the less likely you are to achieve it. Right? Students, a lot of the times, the reason you're struggling with timing is because you are so focused on the time. You are fixated on the time, rather than focusing on what are the things that I'm going to do in order to make the time happen. Right? You're so focused on the goal, you're not focused on the process. Or I can promise you, focus on your process, focus on your strategy, the time, the score, that's an outcome. That's a byproduct of focusing on your strategy. But a lot of times, because you're so focused on timing, you're so focused on getting the questions right, you cut corners with your strategy. You're like, oh, I'm not going to map my passage because I don't have enough time to do that. Oh, but that means every single question you're going to go back and reread. So now you're actually wasting more time. Oh, I'm not going to, I'm actually just going to skip the passage. And oh, let me go to the questions because I'm trying to do it on time. Oh, but actually now you're actually just wasting more time because you're going to have to go back. Oh, I'm going to try to read fast. So now you have to reread the whole time. So now you're wasting time, right? All these things, because we're trying to make it on time, is what's actually harming us for the timing. So those are kind of the biggest priorities. I'm like, maybe try not to focus on the time. That'll actually probably make it so that you finish on time.
Yeah. And this actually brings me back to something that you said a very, very long time ago that stuck with me. We're both having little callbacks.
Right.
Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Yeah. I love that. You saying that, and that must have been 6 months ago or
months
more.
ago.
It changed my brain chemistry of wait, that's really profound. It might be slower to do something right the first time, but it goes so smoothly. And then the smoother it goes, the less likely you have to go back and redo it. So slow is smooth and smooth is fast because you do it once and you're done. So it might take you a little bit longer to read the passage and make a map. It might take a little bit longer. I mean, you're doing more when you go through, but when you get to the questions, you know exactly where to go. It eliminates not just the time spent searching through the passage, but also the cognitive load of uncertainty. Right? It avoids this scary feeling of I have no idea what's going on. And that will save you time. It will also save you some missed questions because you can be more confident about your approach. So slow is smooth and smooth is fast. I love that we both had like
Big
a
callback
callback
episode.
moment.
Big callback. Again, and this is the one thing I love about, working with you, Molly. It's like, oh, because we've both been doing it, but we have different backgrounds, like
Yeah.
in our things. Sometimes you mention things, I'm like, oh, that's so great. I love how
Mhm.
you thought about that.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I even learn in these podcasts, which is
Me
amazing,
too.
which I love.
I know. It's so
And then
fun.
kind of on the point of like learning and improving, a lot of times, a lot of students feel a little bit of a frustration on like, oh, I've worked so much. I don't know if I'm improving, right? Because the
Hmm.
only metric that they have is the full length. They just like, oh, my full length score is the same. I haven't improved at all. And here's the thing, we have to look at that with a little bit of nuance. Because again, we've seen a lot of students that like they're doing all the right things. Like again, there's something to be said, like if you don't review and you do full length, of course your score's not going to improve. But imagine you're doing full length and you're doing all the right things. You're reviewing, you're making goals, you're taking those steps. And then what if your score, the number didn't improve? That's not the whole story, right? This is when we have to take a look at the exam. Take a look at what were the errors that you made. And this is where we actually learn about the improvement. Because I think one of the big things in improving, right, and I think you agree with me with this, Molly, is are you making the same mistakes? That's the main important thing that I look for in exams, right? Like if a student, like again, if I'm working with a student and they're working diligently, they're putting in the work, they're reviewing well, and their score doesn't improve, again, the score is one aspect, but it's not everything. We look at the sections, and if that thing that we set out to do the last exam, like we struggled on data interpretation, but now on this exam, they killed every passage, like in terms of the data, right? They understood it well. Oh, now it's a different issue. That is a win. You've now improved. Maybe this passage or this exam had a different aspect that, oh, maybe this passage hit on, oh, more, I don't know, more relationships. Maybe our mapping could be improved. Okay, we didn't work on that before, but now we can. We start building, we start taking steps where the score is not the whole picture. We have to look at the specifics because, like we said before, it's in the specifics that we lose the fear in the specifics. We actually have a goal, right? Because when you look at the general, it's like, oh my goodness, I'm not improving. Right, but by
Hmm.
looking at those, you can actually measure your improvement. And as long as you continue taking steps, again, the score is a byproduct. It will come as long as you're continuing steps. And so this is something I think would speak to a lot of students, where it's like, it's not just the score. You have to look at, are you making those steps? Are you not making the same mistakes as before?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Are you missing questions for new reasons or is it the same reason?
Hmm.
Okay. That is the ultimate question of am I improving? Score, I mean, hopefully, if we've been studying for a couple months, hopefully we see it
Sure.
improve. And if not, that's a great chance to reach out. Let's get you some assistance, some support, help you diagnose maybe some things that might be holding us back. But especially as we begin or as we really hit the gas with exams, the score, yeah, like you said, it's one little piece of things. That being said, it is very important to unpack. Okay. And we don't want you to get a poor score and then say, I can't take a full length anymore until I've
Hmm.
covered every content. Okay.
Hmm.
That's not going to help us. I also don't want you to get a score back and say, okay, I'm just going to take another one. I didn't like that one. Take another one tomorrow,
Hmm.
see if it's better. Neither of those are very valuable. Okay. We don't want to hold ourselves back, but we also don't want to charge forward when we haven't addressed what the weaknesses are. Because again, if you did that, what is your metric to figure out if you're improving? You don't know why you missed questions before. So how can you tell if the next time you take a full length, you're still missing with those questions? Okay. So the question that I want to pose to you is how do we know if we're ready to take another full length? How can we establish if we're ready to go and proceed and push forward?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I think that's such a great thought because all of a sudden this is a question that we get all the time. And usually my first question to any student is like, okay, I just took a full length, should I take another one? Is I ask them, what's going to be different this full length?
Yeah.
What have you changed since the last full length? What have you learned? What have you worked on that's going to be different this time around? A lot of
Yeah.
students can't answer that question, right? If you can answer that question, that's a fantastic first sign. You're like, oh, last exam, I didn't have a passage reading strategy. I wasn't mapping. I've been practicing my mapping, and now I'm used to mapping the passage. I am going to map this time around. Then I'm like,
Yeah.
yes, you can take another exam because now you've changed something. You've worked on something. Now let's put you to the test, right? But a lot of the time, students just take an exam and then they're like, I just took it. I looked at my exam. Cool. Let's do another one. But don't take any actual steps. Like they have no idea what's going to be different. But then if nothing's going to be different, you're not doing anything different. Don't expect a different result, right? Like it's going to be the same. So I think the first step, have you changed something, right?
Yeah.
And not just, again, change it in your mind, right? Not just like, oh, I need to start mapping. Have you actually done drill work? Have you actually done practice? Again, a lot of people, it's funny, I just spoke with a student the other day about this. They're like, oh, I'm just studying right now, but in the last month, I'll do 2 exams per week. And I'm like, oh my goodness, that is so many exams all at once. Because if you're doing exam review, it's just like going from test to test to test. You don't actually give yourself the opportunity to actually do practice on what you learned, right? Because like you were saying with strategy, it's not enough to be in your mind. You have to actually do it. So have you identified what you're going to work on? Have you identified what will be different? And have you actually given yourself the opportunity to practice that thing? If you have, you are ready for the next full length. And if you haven't, probably not. Mhm.
Yeah, when we just charge forward or when we make assumptions on what we struggle with and then just move forward, it's almost like, in a medical situation, someone presents to you and they have a headache or they have a cough. And it's like you just take their vitals and then just hand them a diagnosis and tell them to leave. It's like you could never do that, right?
Mhm.
Your score is like a set of vitals, but there's so many reasons why you might have an elevated heart rate or an elevated breathing rate or a lower blood pressure. Like you can't stop there and expect to have a solid understanding of what's going on, right? Like that would be negligence. Like you're going to get sued. Please never do that in a medical
Please don't do
context.
that.
You need to diagnose and treat just like you will future patients. But if you just look at your score and that's it, you only have vitals. Okay, that's it. Of course, if something's wacky with your vitals, look deeper. That's a sign. Okay, cool. We need to figure out what's going on, but then you diagnose it and you treat it. Okay, you have to do follow-up labs. You have to do more diagnostic imaging or whatever it is so you can actually figure it out and then you can fix it. Okay, so have you collected enough data points on yourself and your performance? If not, you can't really make a plan and you can't really practice the plan, and therefore you shouldn't take a full length. Okay, so think about that. Don't treat yourself worse than you would treat a future patient, basically. And on that note of collecting data, because ultimately that is what is going to help you figure out how to improve. I can't wait for next week.
Right, yeah, what a clean transition. I love that. Yeah, we are in the process of collecting data about exam six because so many people have questions about kind of these future exams. If I practice for the AMC, is that going to be like one test day? Well, the AMC has released a brand new exam, and that is, as far as we know, the best representation of how their exams are today. And so we're
Mhm.
breaking it down. We're looking to see, hey, guys, is it that much different from your practice exams? Has the AMC completely changed what they do? Do we have to change how we study? Find out in the next episode. We're going to be breaking it down and doing all that stuff. So I'm looking forward to it.
I am too.
Mhm.
We're preaching today, like, don't just go based on your gut and just say, this is my problem and move on. You have to have the data to support it. And we're like, wait a minute, we're going to talk about our thoughts and feelings about exam six. We need data.
We're going to get some data for you.
Yes, and I'm very excited, and we'll be able to present all that. So make sure you tune in for our next episode. It'll be super, super fun. In the meantime, happy studying, you guys. Have a wonderful rest of your day or evening or whenever you're listening. And we'll catch you in the next one.
See you, everybody.